Hi everyone, my name is Lisa Mangum and I'm managing editor at Shadow Mountain Publishing. I'm also a published author and an avid reader my whole life, and for International Writers Day, I thought it would be fun to share a few tips and basic information about starting out being a writer, about plot and character and process, and to just kind of have a chance to visit with you about this creative process that we all love so much. A lot of it's for the beginner writer or the aspiring writer, but even if you've got a few books under your belt, hopefully it's a good refresher course and a chance to just settle in with a topic that we love. So, one of the things that I often hear people want advice about writing, and it's always interesting to get the kinds of feedback. And I asked a couple of my friends to give me some advice that they have, and I particularly loved Sarah's, which is if given a choice between becoming a ninja or a writer, go with ninja. It'll be far easier and much less painful. And for outsiders, it sometimes feels like writing can just sitting down and putting words on paper, but there's a little bit more to it than that. And for those of us who have been writing for a while, or maybe just starting getting into it, you know that it can be really, really tricky. And so I wanted to share a few tips of some good advice that hopefully will inspire you to get going, or maybe get you out of a rut that you might be in. And the first thing is to try to write every day. Originally, I had this as write every day. And then I softened that a little bit because writing words on paper or on your computer every day is really helpful. You've got to get the words down. You just do. But some days the words don't come, and I think it's okay to cut yourself a little slack when you run into those days. Give yourself permission to write a bad first draft. Just make sure that you finish that draft at some point. You learn a lot about writing and the process just through the effort it takes to get to the end, even if it's not the ending you hoped it would be. One bit of advice that you hear a lot is the show don't tell rule, and I think that is a very good one to still live by. Although be aware that there are times when telling is better than showing, especially if you're trying to compress the timeline of your story. Just read lots. Set yourself some realistic and practical deadlines, whether that's words per day or words per week, or finishing a chapter by a certain time, or coming up with 5 new ideas every day. Things that you can reach and then celebrate is very, very good. And one of the best things that you can do is strengthen your voice. As a managing editor, as somebody who goes through the queries and the submissions that come in, one of the things that always catches my eye about a good book is that they have a strong narrative voice and a strong character voice. We'll talk a little bit about voice later on, but it's definitely worth developing and making sure that your voice is as strong as it can be. The best advice I ever heard, though, came from my friend Rick Walton many years ago before he passed away. He was asked this same thing, like, what advice would you give to first-time writers? And he said, quit. But if you can't, do the work. And I love that advice because writing is hard and it can be very frustrating. And there's nothing wrong with saying, you know what, this actually isn't something that brings me joy. Or there's somewhere else I would like to spend my time. But if there's something inside of you that says, I can't not write, I can't walk away from this, there's something inside me, a story or an idea or a message that I have to get out, then you just have to do the work to make that come true. So let's get work a little bit. One thing I always like to start with is asking yourself, why do you write? There's lots of different reasons, and they're all good reasons. And it might be that you want to be on the New York Times bestseller list. It might be that you just want to play and write fan fiction of your favorite stories and characters. It might be because it makes you happy. All of those things are valid and important reasons to figure out what it is about this craft and this profession that draws you to it. And the only right answer, truly, is your answer. If you write because it makes you happy, then that is as valid as if you write because you want to be rich and famous. And they're not mutually exclusive. You can be happy and rich and famous as a writer. But it just means that you'll be aware that your path will be different from perhaps somebody else's path. And that's where, as a writer, comparing yourself to somebody else on the same writing journey can be a little tricky because they might be pursuing a different goal than you are. And so if you can find your own goal and define your own success and climb your own mountain to the top of whatever that success looks like, then you will succeed, and you have succeeded as a writer. And I take comfort in that, knowing that my motivations can change and my answers can change. And the reason why I write different kinds of books can be for different things, and they're all valid all the time. So when we very first get started as writers, you want to start with an idea, right? Every good book starts with a good idea, a kernel or a seed or just one little what if moment. But there's no real such thing as an idea fairy. It's not like somebody just comes down and bestows upon you the brilliant idea. Usually it's you work for it a little bit, and sometimes it's just being open and receptive to what that idea might be. This is one of my favorite comic strips, Pearls Before Swine. This was published a number of years ago, but Pig says, "You still having trouble coming up with ideas for your short story?" And Rat says, "Leave me alone, you dumb pig." And then Pig says, "Well, I thought I'd help you out, so I brought along my buddy Moose. Smack him, Moose!" And then he hits Rat and says, "I said I was waiting for the muse to strike." And Pig calls out, "He wants another moose!" And I love that because sometimes you got to call for the moose. Some ideas, sure, bubble up and it's like a bolt of inspiration, a just bolt of lightning out of the blue, and you just know what it's going to be. And sometimes you got to call for the muse, and you kind of have to work for it a little bit. And that's okay. Both ways are great, and both ways can be a lot of fun. But what do you do if you are struggling to come up with an idea? I think the most important thing is to just be observant to the world around you. It's a crazy place that we live. It just is, and it's full of strange and unusual things, and it's even filled with average things that you can take and twist into something amazing. I also think that it's sometimes appropriate. Sometimes if you eavesdrop on conversations, it can spark something. I still remember being in an elevator somewhere and hearing two people fervently debate whether or not gummy bears should be frozen, if they're better frozen or fresh. And that in and of itself, it may not be an idea, but there may be something there of gummy bears and how to best preserve them. I think it's also important to be informed. This idea of feeding your brain and filling yourself with great ideas and interesting information from arenas that perhaps you don't know very much about, or that don't on the surface seem like they would be good fodder for ideas, could in fact provide you with some great symbolism or some great ideas. I remember reading an article one time that scientists have been tinkering about with brains of mice to selectively withdraw certain memories or to selectively implant new memories. That feels like a really interesting scenario for a story. And just look up news of the weird, news of the wild, see what breakthroughs are coming out through science and technology, and see if something there catches your attention. And then when you have that idea, when something catches your eye, just ask yourself, well, what if? What if it was like this? What if it was set in a different time period? What would be the repercussions of this particular technological advancement? And just keep pushing that. What if it looked different? And you may find something that is really exciting that could be the basis of a story. So one thing I think is a great tip, especially to generate new ideas and to keep your brain always engaged in this idea of looking at the world in a different light, is to keep an idea journal. And it can be as simple as just writing down 5 things every day that you find interesting or engaging. It could be a sound you heard, or a turn of phrase, or the way the light caught on the river outside your house, just something that kind of made you stop and pause could be the inspiration for a cool idea. And then just pick one idea and write down a what if scenario. How could I take this thing that caught my attention and turn it into a paragraph, or turn it into an idea, or turn it into something more? And don't be afraid to combine unrelated ideas to create something new. I think a lot of our best, most interesting ideas come when we draw from a variety of sources. Personally, when I was writing the Hourglass Door trilogy, I drew inspiration from a number of sources, from Dante's Divine Comedy to the TV show The A-Team, to the movie Raising Arizona, to time travel and Leonardo da Vinci. And I put them all together and came up with something that for me was really exciting and really engaging, and something I hadn't really seen before. So now that you've got a really good idea, and now what do you do with it? How do you turn that idea into a story? Well, you hang that idea on some kind of structure, a plot structure, so that you can navigate your way through exploring the idea from start to finish. And that's really all a plot is it's just getting your characters from point A to point B. And there's a number of ways that you can get there. Just like if you're traveling from New York to LA, you could walk. That would take a long time, but you could do it. You could take a train, you could take a plane, you could even maybe take a boat if you want to go all the way around through the Panama Canal. There's lots of different ways. But the most important way when it comes to plot is to make sure that your story is built on forward progression and increased momentum and unrelenting tension. If you have those elements, your plot is going to continue to move forward, and your readers are going to be compelled to go along for the ride. And different stories may respond better to different methods of plot work. So be flexible. If the hero's journey works for one story, but doesn't for another, that doesn't mean you're a bad writer. That doesn't mean that you've written a bad book. That doesn't mean you have a bad idea. It just means that a different structure is helping you tell that story in a different way. So where do I start? What are these plot structures, and how do I know which one is best for me to have that progression and momentum and tension? There's a number of them out there, and you can Google these and really do deep dives into how they work and how they're structured. And I would encourage you to be familiar with all of them so that you kind of know how to bounce from one to the other, find the one where you feel like your strengths already match up with them. I mentioned the hero's journey. There's also the 3-act structure. There's a 7-point arc. The snowflake method, that's a great one also for brainstorming ideas on starting small and then extrapolating out. A scene and sequel, and a Save the Cat, which is Blake Snyder's method for doing a beat sheet. And it was originally designed for screenplays, but it works very well for novels as well, as to, at this point in the story, this is the thing that should be happening. So you always have a guidepost, a milestone to shoot for the next thing to keep your story moving. And identifying whatever your method is best for you is really helpful. And again, like I said, it can change from book to book. And so if you're struggling with getting your idea off the ground, figuring out how to move it forward, try it in a different plot structure and see if that helps you break free and see new things in your story and new ideas and new relationships between your characters. The main thing is you always want to drive your plot forward. And the best way to do that is by introducing problems to solve for your characters. If they can start out solving small problems that then lead to larger problems and require more character development and require more ingenuity or more courage, your characters are going to grow. Larger problems will lead to confrontations. Confrontations with other characters lead to character growth and to conflict, and that all makes for very interesting reading. So if you're ever stuck in your story and you don't know what to do next, look at what the problem is that your character is trying to solve in that moment and ask yourself, is this a big enough problem for them to solve? And if it isn't, up the stakes, make the problem harder to solve. And then ask yourself, what's the fallout, good or bad, of solving this problem. And that might help you move your story to that next step down in the plot structure. So, as much as I love Yoda, I think when it comes to writing, there is always try. It's not a pass fail. You get one shot, you write it down, and it has to be perfect. You're going to try lots of different things that might work, that might not work, and you're going to rewrite a lot. I've mentioned a few of the plot structure archetypes earlier, but here are a few more that you might want to look at. Dan Wells has done a fantastic video class on story structure. You'll just search for that on YouTube. I'm sure you can find it. John Brown did one, How to Write a Story That Rocks, and covers a lot of the try-fail cycle that characters go through that can help propel and motivate your story forward. And I mentioned also the Save the Cat by Blake Snyder, and that's a great resource, either online or from the books that have been published, to help you structure out a story and see it from the big perspective, and to see how your idea moves from the something cool seed of an idea into characters that live in this world, into problems that are being solved, and into a satisfying conclusion. And sometimes, even with all of that, writing is hard and we get writer's block and we don't know what to do. So is it a real thing? Is writer's block a real thing? Yeah, I think it is. Being creative on demand can be challenging. If somebody says you have 3 days to write this particular thing and you don't know what to do, it can be paralyzing. And that can be really stressful. I think it's also a real thing. You might be stuck in your story for any number of valid reasons. Maybe your characters are undeveloped. Maybe your plot is feeling sluggish. Maybe the idea is just not robust enough to withstand the pressure of development. You keep pushing the idea and it keeps falling apart because it needs something else to sustain it. And maybe you just honestly don't know what happens next. And all of those things are surmountable. Long ago, I looked at writer's block and struggled with it. And then I told myself, you know what? This is just an opportunity for me to solve a problem creatively. And as a writer, I'm trying to be creative. And so when I'm in a rut, or when I'm stuck, or when I'm not jiving with the story, I take a step back and say, okay, what's the problem here that I'm trying to solve? Do I need to develop my characters more, dig into their backstory? Do I need to introduce a major problem for those characters to overcome in the plot? Do I need to add more ideas or more themes to help sustain the idea over another chapter or two? And if you don't know what happens next, maybe I skip it and I do something else. But on the flip side, I kind of think that writer's block can also not be a real thing. It could actually just be masquerading as procrastination. And it might also become a self-fulfilling prophecy, that you don't write because you tell yourself that you can't write. And then you can't write because you aren't writing. And again, if you look at it, if you're in that world of procrastination or that self-fulfilling prophecy, really the best way to get out of it is you write yourself out, if I may quote from Hamilton. Just get out of your way and write something. It doesn't have to be good. That's the biggest secret. And I think the biggest strength and power that you have over writer's block is whatever you write to get out of it doesn't have to be any good. It doesn't even have to be something that ultimately ends up in your book. It just has to be written down so that you can write your way through it until you get to the part where you feel like you're on firmer ground. So some of the strategies that I've come up with or that I've employed over the years when I've been faced with writer's block, I've put here on a list things from skipping it or to blowing something up, or even just changing where the location in my house of where I'm writing sometimes is enough to jolt me out of it. But I call this avoid the zombie apocalypse because of something my brother said to me when I was writing book 3 in my trilogy, The Forgotten Locket. And I was in a world of hurt. I had missed my deadline twice. I did not have any idea where I was going to go. I was drowning in the murky middle, and I just was at a loss. And my brother said, well, you know what nobody would expect in your young adult romance? A zombie apocalypse. And we laughed about it, and I'm like, you're right. And so from then on, whenever I got stuck, I would tell myself, well, what's the next best idea besides a zombie apocalypse? Because if I can't come up with anything, I'm going to have to write about zombies coming over the hill and eating my main characters, and they turn into a zombie, and then what do I do? And so for me, that was enough to kind of propel me forward. It didn't have to be a great idea. It just had to be something other than the zombie apocalypse for to get me going and to keep me writing into the story. Now, of course, if you are writing a zombie apocalypse story, this might not apply as much, but hopefully there's something on this list that you feel you could try when you're feeling stuck and you know you've got to write something, you don't know what it is. Maybe you just ask yourself, what's the worst thing that could happen to my characters in this moment? And then just write that. When you're done writing, you've got this great idea, you've stretched it over this beautiful plot structure, you've worked your way through writer's block whenever it comes up by solving problems creatively, and you're still passionate about it, and maybe you know the book is not great and it's not exactly what you envisioned, perfect in your head, but that's okay, because part of writing is revising and rewriting and editing, and that's part of it, part of the process as well. Of course, you do not have to be a professional editor to be a good writer or a professional writer, but there are a few things that would be helpful for you to at least consider as you're working, as you're writing. And the first thing is that editing and writing are two different processes, and please do not try to do them both at the same time. Use different parts of your brain when you're being creative versus when you're being analytical. And if you get those crossed, if you try to edit before you're creatively worked your way through the story, you could get bogged down in revising chapter 1 900 times and never actually moving on to chapter 2, let alone chapter 22. So you just write it all, write the good and the bad, and then wait. Set it aside for a time, even if it's a couple of days, if it's a couple of weeks, set it aside and let it cool off. And then when you go back, you'll see things with fresh eyes. You'll see overused words that crop up. You'll see plot holes. You'll see places that can be strengthened. And you can be a little bit more objective about what's working and what's not working. And then it'll be easier for you to ditch the things that are not working and focus on the things that are working and elevate the entire process. So don't panic if after you write your first draft, you think, well, this is terrible. It's supposed to be terrible. It's okay. You can make it better. One way that you can also help make your story better is if you are have a good writing group or critique partners that can help read your story and point out things that they see or give you encouragement to continue when perhaps you're feeling like there's no point. Writing groups are also a great way for you to hone your own editorial skills. Sometimes it's easier to spot problems in somebody else's work than it is in your own. But by practicing with somebody else, then you can extrapolate that and say, oh, this particular element was a problem in this manuscript. I wonder if it's a problem in my manuscript. And you can go back and look at it and find those places to strengthen. They're also a great way to be accountable for your deadlines, to keep you on track, to make sure that it's time to generate something. When I was in a writing group years ago and we met every Thursday, I had to have something to turn in, and it really helped me let go of this need for perfection. It was get something down, send it in, see what happens. And there was a very freeing experience. I found it was a very safe place to fail. I could bring terrible writing in and nobody would laugh at me or judge me or tell me I couldn't do it. They would just say, this part doesn't work, but this part over here, that's actually really good. And it was also an amazingly joyous place to succeed. It was great when I felt like I had really written something that spoke to me, that was good, and I could share it with people who understood and who cared. So when you're doing your editing pass, you've written your story, somehow they need to be granted permission to be a writer. That there's something in them that they say, it's what other people do, not me. So, as a professional writer, as a professional editor, and as a friend, I am here to give you permission. I am granting you the permission to be prolific. Write as much as you want, in whatever genre you want, as many times as you want. Write little tiny short stories, write flash fiction, write epic love stories, write world-changing fantasy. Do it all. Write every single thing that's in your heart. You have permission to do that. You also have permission to be patient. I give you permission to be patient with yourself as you learn your craft, as you work towards your own individual goals, as you look for an agent, as you look for a publisher, as you await the release of your first book or your fifth book. Be patient with yourself in your own creativity and your own growth. And you have permission to be persistent. Don't give up on your writing. Don't give up on your ideas. Don't give up on the story that is in your heart that you want to tell. Going back to Rick Walton's advice about quitting, if you can't quit, do the work. I give you permission to do the work. You have it within you to tell the story that you were meant to tell. I hope this was helpful. There's a little bit about me and how you can contact me. And of course, you can always find me at shadowmountain.com and on our Facebook page,